Daniel Henderson. Michael Widmer.
Present.
Bill Hauk.
Here.
Michael Drinkwater.
Here.
John Enlow.
Here.
John Flansburgh.
Here.
Mickey Hazelwood. John Martini. John Combs.
Here.
Dave Solero.
Here.
Mervyn Wright. John Zimmerman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Next item on the agenda is public comment. Seeing none, we'll move on. Next item is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That's right, hold up to one or two.
That's right. Cure the fingers.
Next is the approval of the minutes from May 15th. Have a motion?
Second?
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Zimmerman.
Agenda item number 5, report, discussion, and possible action on comments received in draft update to the Prosper Financing Chapter of 2021-2040 Regional Water Management Plan. Discussion and possible direction to staff. Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, Catherine Hansford, who is our consultant on this, is called to jury duty, of course, today, of all days, and so she wasn't here to present to you today her findings. But as you know, last meeting we did have this was presented to you, the Cost and Finance chapter for review and comment. Neither she nor staff has received any comment with regards to this chapter, and so there are no further comments or review comments or any other changes to the chapter at this time. It's up to you, but I would think that at this point in time that the chapter and the way it's formulated and everything else is probably in good shape to go to a final draft. At this point, I don't think anything is going to change of any significance, other than maybe a few numbers, and I'm sure we'll present those to you as they happen, but unless you want to see this one on the agenda moving forward, it might be it's a possible motion if you want to do that. So
I guess we're looking for a motion to accept the draft report, subject to further revision.
yeah, or just perhaps accept it as a final draft, and then we'll just, it's always open for comment, and you can always continue to make, review it and comment all the way up to the time when we decide at the end. But I think at this point, unless you want to see it every week or every month, I suggest that maybe we call this a final draft.
Okay, so I'll open it up for discussion and possibly entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
All right, we have a motion, first and a second.
Yeah.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All
Motion
right.
carries. Next agenda item, report, discussion, possible action on comments received on draft update to the stormwater and watershed-based water quality planning chapter of the 2021-2040 Regional Water Management Plan. Discussion and possible direction to staff. Mr. Wessel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, as you know, this was presented to you by Teresa Jones of the City of Reno last meeting. Since that meeting, it has been presented to the Stormwater Permit Committee for their review. They've recommended it with no changes. Unfortunately, Teresa's not here to present that here for you today, but there was one comment by Mr. Drinkwater that in reference to some monitoring locations and so on that were included, and that was the only update to this chapter that has happened. So there's no further comment or review of this chapter. Again, if you'd like to make this a final draft, I would recommend that as a good idea.
Guess we'll entertain a motion.
Go ahead and move to accept the stormwater and watershed-based water planning, water quality planning chapter as the final draft.
Very good. We have a first and a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All All right, next, agenda item number 7, report discussion, possible action on comments received on the draft update to the population forecast and projections of water demand, peak day requirements, and wastewater flow chapters of the 2021-2040 Regional Water Management Plan. Discussion and possible action to staff. Mr. Westphal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, as you know, that Mr. Smitherman has been working on this along with TMRPA, and I think there were some considerable changes in this since it was presented to you last time, so I'll let Jim discuss that with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Chris is right. The chapter that I handed out to you last month, you can pretty much throw it away. There were significant comments on the methodology and the results of the wastewater flow projections, and I got new data from COMWA on the water demand projections and the peak day requirements. So all the data is pretty much different. As I reported last month, all the introductory and summary sections that are up front haven't been updated completely yet, so I'm going to leave those last. I'll tell you what the chapter's about after the chapter's written. I'll pick up in section 6.1 if anybody wants a review of the consensus forecast and the comparison with the water resources identified in the plan. The only real change from the last time we went through that is the amount of available water resources, potentially available sustainable water resources in the county or in the planning area actually increased. Some basins went up, some basins went down. I think that was from Mr. Wessel's review of the state engineer's most recent basin summaries. And so now, let's see, what's the number? 218,000 acre feet per year potentially available within the county. Now, that's on paper. That's either water that's in play or could possibly be converted to municipal industrial use. It's a high number. It includes all of the basins from the south end of the county all the way up through, I think, Smoke Creek Desert is the furthest north it goes. An analysis that Chris and I did a couple of years ago, we trimmed down the number of basins that water rights were tallied in to just those basins that actually have water in play for municipal industrial purposes, and came up with 143,800 acre feet. And that's with no additional water projects, no additional importation projects, that sort of thing. So it includes the Honey Lake importation project, this Fish Springs project, and basins that have water already in use. So anyway, that's more than I was going to say about that chapter, or that section, because nobody really asked for it. But that's section 6.1. I'll move on to 6.2. That's the section on water demands. So Sean Stoddard over at TUMWA calculated new water demand projections. You can see those in table 6.1 and 6.2 in the chapter. So the 2040 projection is for 107,697 acre feet to serve the county's population that year. Thanks, Jen, for bringing that up. So he calculated in 5-year increments for us, and the increment, I guess the total increment for the 5-year, or for the 20 years from 2020 to 2040 is about 15,700, 15,800 acre feet to serve some 92,000 additional population. Peak day production is the next slide, and that one it doesn't really have a whole lot of reference in the chapter, but the law asks for peak day requirements, and so we provide it every time we update the chapter. Those are numbers from Sean Stoddard at TUMWA as well. So next section is wastewater flow projections, if there aren't any questions on the TUMWA demand. Actually, I should take a step back. Sean provides me a projection for TUMWA's service area and what they project as far as growth in 5-year increments, and then he gives me a remainder of county. So you'll see that broken out in your table in the chapter as well. So we can see what kind of water resources or water demand growth is going to happen outside of TUMWA's service area. Okay, this is the wastewater flow projections section. So Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency, they use the same methodology that they used 5 years ago that we thought gave us pretty reasonable results to calculate wastewater flows for each of the wastewater facility service areas. The consensus forecast then, as far as their methodology, is split into service areas and then TUMWA water use coefficients for winter water use. So during the winter, water in the house or in the business, water down the drain, that should show up at the wastewater treatment plants. Then they calculate flows by service area and rectify those with the distribution of the consensus forecast across the Truckee Meadows service area. So the first step they do is to validate their methodology. And so this time around, because we had some high water years and low water years in the last 5 years, they were advised to take a 5-year average by the wastewater service providers. So they took wastewater flows observed at the wastewater treatment plants for the years 2016 through 2020. And let's see, you can see those. I think, go back one slide, Jen. I think we need, this is, okay, so these are the totals of tables 6.5 and 6.6 in the chapter. So that's where we have it actually split out by year and by facility. So these are just the totals for all of the wastewater flows at the 5 regional wastewater treatment plants. Calculated is the top row and observed is the bottom row. So I guess the bottom line on this one is that if you go all the way over to the right, their overall average numbers matched pretty closely. I think it's within about 1%. But if you look at the observed flows for 2017 and 2019, you can see the wisdom in taking the 5-year average. Flows observed in 2017 were greater than the following year, 18. Went back up in 19, and you remember both of those were high water years, 17 and 19. And then flows back in observed in 2020 are back down below the prior year. You can see that the calculated flows just go up incrementally in a more linear fashion. Uncertainties were apparent, though, when we looked deeper into the tables that are in your chapter, and so some of the facilities were overestimated as far as their flows, and some of them were underestimated. So this, plus some uncertainties in how the non-residential flows were calculated, led, I'll kind of cut to the quick. As we discussed this with the regional effluent management team, we went over this a couple of times with Jeremy Smith at TMRPA. In the end, we decided to go with some flow factors that are kind of more accepted regionally and had been used in past flow projections by some of the jurisdictions. And that was to use 175 gallons per day per ERU for residential single-family projections, 115 gallons per day per ERU for residential multifamily developments. And then the remainder would be distributed for the non-residential. And what we ended up there was a reasonably acceptable factor of about 20, it was 24, I think, 24 and a half gallons per day per employee is how the data came out with TMRPA, since they project employees and not water services for employees. So they have to do some math to come up with their per employee water use. That jived a lot more with what Thomas said was reasonable. Excuse me. The factor that was calculated as far as the prior methodology came up with about double. I think it was 49 gallons per day per employee, and that seemed just way out of line high. So we kind of pivoted, went with the accepted factors, and that's where we came up with the data that we see on the next slide, Jen, if you could advance to that one again. No, forward. Better, thank you. So these are the numbers that are presented to you today as the, in 5-year increments, the 20-year flow projections. Now, we readily recognize that these are probably not as aggressive as the numbers that are used for individual facility plans for each one of the facilities. But these are trued up to what TMRPA has projected as far as fitting the consensus forecast growth increment for 20 years into into all of the different service areas and then using the calculated method to come up with what the flows are. If you took any one of these water reclamation facilities out, looked at its individual facility plan, you might find that, that their flow predictions are quite a bit higher than what we're showing here. But that's for their planning purposes and, you know, in summary, you've got to plan for more rapid growth than TMRPA is showing you just because it could be different. What TMR has calculated is one scenario for growth based on their projections in the consensus forecast, and then their distribution of that population throughout the service areas. So that's really what I have for new data. I know this is the first time you've seen this unless you're on the regional effluent management team, so I'm not going to ask you to critique them right now. You got a month to look through it, get comments, questions, and that sort of thing back to me or any of the service providers who have been involved in this, but I'd be happy to take your questions. You can get me at the same email address when I was at the county. That account is still active. Moving on to the rest of the chapter, just to let you know, the next section is on that water balance map. So it's a graphic of the Truckee Meadows service area that has all the sources of water, the wastewater treatment capacity, effluent disposal and management capacity, and then pluses and minuses, deficits and overages in any one of the basins. I'm working with TMRPA on that one right now. And so we should have, hopefully, if things go well, in them taking what a couple of different consulting firms have done in prior years and trying to integrate it into their GIS system, we should have something to report on that section of the chapter next month. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, Chris, and if you have questions or comments, I'm happy to take those. Otherwise, I think I'm done.
Any discussion?
Jim, just in review of the numbers that were used, we did have a study, both Sparks and Reno have performed a study on the difference between single-family equivalent residential units and multifamily, and our numbers were actually much closer together than this, but I'll just forward that information to you as a review from that study that was taken.
Okay, I had heard that Sparks did that. I didn't realize that Reno was involved in the study as well. So that broadens the coverage of that quite a bit further. Okay, that'll be something to discuss. We may make some revisions because of that. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Enlow?
I just want to thank you, Jim, for sending us the kind of the updated water resources baseline.
Oh, you bet.
I just want to take a close look at that 218,000 number. I looked quickly at the information you sent us, and I saw one of the changes in there that really was reflecting, I think, Tumwa's groundwater rights. And I've got a concern representing our groundwater rights as sustainable water resources, because two different things. So we'll get some comments back to you on that.
Sure.
Okay, so that might mean a revision to Chapter 2?
Yeah, I guess that would be, and which is fine. That table was merely a reflection of what the state engineer indicates is present, not an indication of what could be converted or truly. But if a person were to look at it and say, "Wow, that's how much we have," but then the real problem comes in at the economic cost of converting that, all kinds of other elements, proving up that water. That isn't proven. It's just over the last two updates, I've had to update that table, and I was actually pretty surprised because it updated a lot in both updates. And I talked to the state engineer about that, and I was told that they had made considerable effort to update all their records in the last 10 years. And so supposedly that's reflective of that. So and so it just comes right off their manner of use in their tables. So there's nothing in there that shouldn't. I would think so.
A suggestion might be maybe then changing, instead of referring to them as sustainable water resources, maybe we call them something different.
Sure.
Because I think, for example, Tumwa's resources, you had 50,000 acre feet in this new number.
Yeah.
And it didn't reflect State Engineer Order 1161 that really reduces our long-term annual pumping amount on a majority of those water rights. So
Right.
just a detail,
Right.
but it's concerning seeing a number that big when I think we all
I know.
know that there's
Yeah.
not that much wet water to go along with that many water rights.
Agreed. So, yeah, actually, a change in the description of that may be satisfactory, then, okay. That, maybe we just do that. We'll figure that. We'll take a look at the 2 chapters and see how that's reflected.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any further discussion? So you're
think
looking
we're
for a
just-
motion here?
Yeah, I think we're just looking for an acceptance of the report today as it is. This chapter is not ready we still have, we still have the water balance model. That's gonna concern this body, I think, for another day. So we have to bring that back and have you look at that too. So just an acceptance of the report would be great.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, next item on the agenda is number 8. Report discussion, possible action on comments received on the draft update to the Regional Water Planning Policies and Criteria Chapter for the 2021-2040 Regional Water Management Plan. Discussion and possible action to staff. Mr. Wessel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we did bring this to you last time, and there were some changes. We had quite a few changes. Tumwa needed to update their portions of this chapter 1 to reflect their current water resource plan, and they did that, I think, successfully, and we did not receive any other comments. However, I know that Commissioner Flansburgh did make a request that we add some acknowledgement to the chapter to reflect the development of wastewater control frameworks. So in section or policy 2.1B, we added a sentence on there to reflect that. In addition, the only other thing that changed in this chapter since last time was the conformance review procedures. They were adopted by the Western Regional Water Commission subsequent to our last meeting and are now reflected in the chapter. Both of those were reflected in at least track changes in your attachments. So outside of that, there have been no further comments regarding this chapter, and assuming that those 2 changes are acceptable, I would recommend that we accept this as a final draft also.
Doesn't look like we have any discussion, so entertain a motion to accept this chapter.
So moved. I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Motion carries. Okay, agenda item number 10, discussion and action on possible recommendations to the Western Regional Water Commission on amendment to Western Regional Water Commission governing rules and regulations addressing unsolicited proposals. To you, Mr.
Right.
Wessel.
Mr. Chair, I think you missed number 9.
Oh, I did. Okay, number 9, status and discussion regarding chapters and schedule related to the drafting and presentation of the 2021-2040 Regional Water Management Plan update and possible direction to staff. Mr. Wessel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, I included kind of a revised schedule and update for the update in your packet. Obviously, I tried to reflect what was going to happen today. I think the only thing that's probably not properly reflected is the continuation of the population forecast chapter, which will go on certainly to July, if not further. But I believe that we're down to the last 4 chapters for review. I think everything else has been accepted as a final draft at this point in time. So you can see the revised schedule there just shows that in the next 3 months, up through beginning of October, we'll be reviewing some of the final chapters. the flood chapter hasn't, they went through a revision of what their plan was. They got a new plan, so I think that we'll be seeing, I need to get something from Danielle Henderson on that to reflect their changes. The wastewater and effluent management chapter, that one's in progress right now, and I know Jim's working on that with Jeff Curtis and Roy Johnson, so once they've got the guidance document completed, I think that'll be reflected in that chapter, and that's going to be an incredibly important element of that chapter, so we got to capture that. And then the last thing is the issues and actions chapter, and that typically we don't do that till the very end because we don't know what they are until we've seen all the rest of the chapters. We're getting close, but those will probably come along a little later on. So I don't know. Looking at the current, adoption period would be October. I don't know. We'll see. October, it's going to be maybe in November. I don't know. Still dancing around there a little bit, but it's probably my best guess at the moment.
Okay, well, what are you looking for here, Mr. Wessel?
This is really open for discussion on any of the chapters, if there were any discussions for that. If you had any comments on any other chapters that, we've reviewed or may still be under review. And if not, then I'm not sure we need any action, do we? Probably don't need any action at all.
Okay, we'll move on. Okay, now agenda item number 10, discussion and action on possible recommendation to the Western Regional Water Commission on amendment to Western Regional Water Commission governing rules and regulations addressing unsolicited proposals. Mr. Wessel.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
Mr. Pani.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that the chairman of the Western Regional Water Commission had requested that we review our governing rules to evaluate how unsolicited proposals are dealt with by the commission. When I say that, I mean the commissions, I think. And as such, Mr. Pani has gone through a couple of the governing rules and added some text. And you can see that's attached to your staff report if you have that with you. It's outlined in red. Basically, the changes that are reflected, and there's three basic elements to it. Unsolicited proposal ideas presented in the public comment at any meeting of the Western Regional Water Commission, and one little omission I thought maybe we should add, and NNWPC, shall not be considered by the board for comment, action, or acceptance. Unsolicited proposals from a private sector must be sponsored by a member, meaning any one of you or anyone from the Western Regional Water Commission, in order for staff to bring that forward. So for consideration by the board. And third, sponsored unsolicited proposals shall be presented first to this body, Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission, and for review and recommendation of the Western Regional Water Commission. That includes any sponsored projects that a member of the Western Regional Water Commission may want the board to consider. So, to be honest with you, I know that for years, Jim and I, when we were contemplating things that were brought to the commission, or certainly to staff, we always felt that it should go through this body before it went up to the Western Regional. I think that's the way the act had intended that. I think this actually just kind of solidifies that in our governing rules. And I don't know if you have any comment on that, Mike.
The only thing I'd add is we did get input at the chair's request. We got input on how, sorry about my voice, how the county handles unsolicited proposals and how the city of Sparks does. And we use those somewhat as models on this. And again, a little unusual, this is the regulations and rules of the Western Regional Water Commission, not this board, but because the proposal would contemplate bringing action to this body, we thought it would be important to get your input and in a perfect world, some recommendations before taking it to the Western Regional Water Commission.
Any further discussion?
I have a comment. So I agree, and I like what you wrote. I would like to see if one of these members wants to bring forth an unsolicited proposal, in other words, one of us wants to sponsor it, I think that it's incumbent upon them to bring a funding plan with it. If it's going to shift funding away from our priorities that, we put together the list every year, we allocate in general, in large blocks, we allocate funding to different areas. If it's going to change that, I think it's incumbent upon the person sponsoring this unsolicited proposal to at least make a suggestion of where the money's going to come from. And certainly that would not be binding in any way, but it would at least be a place to start.
Thank you. Mr. Flansburgh, did you have?
I was just going to say, I get this is for the Western Regional Water Commission. It's contemplated that these would come before the Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission. I believe that's appropriate. And Michael, your request, I think, also is something that should be added into this, again, in terms of the financial support to be heard. I don't know that it has to be 100% identified, but the potential location of where those funds would come from. I think that would be important, bringing something forward. So I would be in agreement with this. I think it's important that there is a format to handle unsolicited proposals, just for the organization of the body of work that needs to happen.
Would, to that comment, adding language that would require the proposer to come with a proposal for funding of the project, that type of kind of broad language, would that address your concern?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I have a procedural question. If one of the members of the Western Regional Water Commission was to be the sponsoring person, would they have to present to us? That seems a little upside down in protocol.
So the language only requires a sponsorship. So they could just indicate that, yes, we sponsor this program, but the actual proponent of the project could present to you.
Okay.
Yeah, to that point, the way I would envision this, the only way I could imagine this really is that the sponsor would, and the proponent would approach staff, and then staff would agendize the item. I think the key here is that proposals that are actually agendized for action is really the issue at hand. And to prevent just random things from coming on, and I know it's been always a concern since the inception of this body, how do we handle that? We've always kind of relied on you as members to bring us ideas and thoughts that you thought were important, and that's one of the reasons for the priority setting, which is important. And so I would imagine that would come to staff, and staff would have to figure out a way, to your point, is it feasible within the budget? Where would it fall within the budget? And how might it be managed? And I think that would be staff's, would have to manage that. But certainly that would be proposed. We do that all the time. You'll see in your staff reports there's a fiscal impact element that identifies where the money comes from, what section, and that section is usually identified. I know you may not understand it because there's a number, but for staff it identifies it within a certain category of, like our water, wastewater, reclaim, whatever the category happens to be. So in that regard, it is actually identified. And I would anticipate that would be the way that would be handled. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, that's fine,
Yeah.
Unless we get to the point where there's no room at the end, so to speak. The unsolicited proposal is necessarily going to cause us to not do something that we prioritize.
Yeah. Right.
And then we need to say, all right, well, you're bringing it forward. It's obviously important to you. Tell me, what is it more important than? What
Right.
on our current list is going to get left for next year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a consideration for this board, and certainly your option to swap, priorities if you felt that there was something that was in need. But it's definitely, I'd certainly put that onus on staff to make that clear that something like that would be required, that there isn't enough funds, or, often, most of the time you guys ask, do we have enough funds for this to happen? And so I think, if there weren't, then staff's responsibility would be to indicate that in the staff report.
Any further discussion? So I guess based on today's discussion, are we going to take this amendment to the governing rules and regulations, take it back and do some more editing and come back next month? Or-
So up to you, we could make those 2 edits and bring it back to you, or you could recommend approval with those 2 edits in it, and it goes straight to the commission from here.
Move to approve with the edits as approved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item, agenda item number 11, Program Manager's Report. Mr. Wessel, report on the status of projects and work plans supported by the Regional Water Management Fund and financial report.
Yeah, I think that so there's nothing really new about this report. It stands on its own. If you have any questions with regard to our financial status, I think it should be answered in there. If not, I'd be willing to take any questions. The good news is everything on the page is black, so.
Any discussion by the board?
Move to accept the report.
Is this an action item? Okay, I'm looking for a second then.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Agenda item number 12, discussion regarding location and possible agenda items for the upcoming Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission meetings and possible direction to staff. Mr. Wessel.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was typing on the rules, but that did not require an action, so you can rescind the action that you took on that.
Do we physically need to do that?
No, they just note on the record that no action was needed.
Yeah,
Okay, good enough for me.
must have been a belt and suspenders on my part, sorry about that. Yeah, so as to our next item, the upcoming meetings. So this meeting was, this meeting barely happened, so I'm just glad everybody made it. And obviously, we're meeting in person now. I assume that that is the requirement moving forward. So we should anticipate in-person meetings from here on out. I have scheduled here a July 7th meeting. It would be to review additional information, say on the on Chapter 7, and also I'm not sure whether we'll be anywhere along on the wastewater effluent management chapter, possibly the flood chapter, and issues and actions plan. Those are the only things I really have slated. I do not, at this time, have or anticipate any proposals coming forward. They haven't materialized, so, although they are identified in the budget, so. That's pretty much what I have, and then possibly a September 1st meeting also if we need to. It all depends on. August is out unless you want to meet without me, and you're welcome to do that, but I probably won't be around, so at least I'm not planning on it. So that's all I have as for our future meetings.
Any discussion by board members? All right, so I guess this is for action. We're looking for a motion to accept plans for future meetings.
So you're suggesting July 7th, you'll have 2 chapters.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, yeah, possibly they're still in work, so we're seeing how far along they're going to get. That's one of the problems. I can't quite tell how fast the chapters are coming out, so I'm playing it. If they're not there, I'm willing to cancel the meeting, and we'll put it off to September, and we could do that too.
So how do we work, so Chris won't be here in August, but say we actually have business to conduct in August, how would we do that?
Well, there will be some type of accommodation. If he is gone, there'll be somebody, whether in an interim position or a permanent position, so that business can be conducted.
We can make August happen if we have to. I mean, you know, but I'm just anticipating, I'm anticipating being gone on vacation at that time, that's all. But I think any of the stuff that we have right now identified for the meetings could be put all the way to September if we want to. It's just a matter of how long the meetings get to be, you know, and obviously we can, you know, if we get to the point where we think these chapters are pretty far along. One thing I'm trying to do is accommodate a request last time during our update of the plan in 2016. I believe Commissioner Drinkwater made the comment that we didn't have enough time to review the chapters 3 days in advance of a meeting, and I think that was a reasonable request. And so trying to give you 30 days at least to review these chapters and make comment on them. And frankly, if you don't have a comment within 30 days, I doubt you're going to make one in 90. So, you know, that's kind of my, you know, that's the method to my madness here to make this work. So that's kind of how I'm working these, but if, you know, if you want, I was hoping we could get some of these out before, so we'd have some time over August to look them over and be ready to go on in September, but it may not be, you know, again, we're just sliding a little bit on our schedule. I just can't get these out fast enough. But we've got, you know, to be fair, we've got, I think, almost, 6 of 10 chapters, you know, in final draft form, so we're not far off. You know, light at the end of the tunnel is definitely there, so.
So would you want to propose a meeting for July 7th? And then if we're not ready for that,
Sure.
potentially delay it to August or September?
Yeah, we can do that.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, motion carries. Agenda item 13, commission comments. All right, hearing none, move on. Staff comments.
No comment.
All right, public comment. No public comment. All right, last item on the agenda, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. All right. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.